Hey everybody, my name is Kylie Davila, and tonight I'm going to be going over the principles 4 through 6 in Winning with People by John Maxwell. And the first two principles I'm going to go over are going to wrap up the readiness question, which is, are we prepared for relationships? And that's the hammer principle and the elevator principle. And then the third one is actually going to shift into the connection question, which is, are we willing to focus on others? And all of it's super, super good. I actually lost my spot. Okay. So the hammer principle, he says, never use a hammer to swat a fly off someone's head. If you would win the world, melt it, do not hammer it. And so the question I must ask myself is, would others say I overreact to small things in a relationship? And he starts out by using this example of him and his wife and talking about how he says, I was putting winning the arguments ahead of winning the relationship. And I thought that was very good. And he also brought awareness to the fact that he knows he's a persuasive person and that he has skills of communication. Because I don't know if y'all have ever felt like this before, but if I feel like somebody is like really good with words or they can just like talk around me, sometimes I feel like a little bit intimidated, and sometimes I walk away still feeling like, actually, I think I was in the right, or whatever, but you kind of get all mixed up and it's just not good. And he brings that up. He recognizes he's really persuasive. He has communication skills, and he says realizing that having the right attitude was more important than having the right answers. And I think that it was really good. So number one, he says to look at the total picture. Do you come to conclusions long before the problem has been laid out before you? And I think that this comes down to you being a good listener, because I something that's always stuck to me was, you should listen to understand and not to reply. And I have to tell myself that. I think it's like a nervousness. I don't know. Sometimes when I'm talking with people, I like, oh my gosh, what's my response going to be? And I like start to get ahead. And he says you should listen, ask questions, listen again, ask more questions, listen some more, and then respond. And so it's really just taking a step back and not feeling like you have to have an opinion or go ahead and start to like, oh, this is what I'm going to say back. I need to say, it's like slow down and just listen. Number two, he talks about timing. The real art of conversation is not to say the right thing in the right place, but is not only, sorry, to say the right thing in the right place, but to leave unsaid the wrong thing at the tempting moment. And I'm sure we've all had a moment where something, whether it be our temper or whatever, something comes off the tongue and you're like, oh my gosh, I really wish I could take that back. But so timing is really important. He brings up this example of Casey Jones, which is the Celtics coach. And he says that one of his players noticed that if they lost the game or, didn't hit the shot, and because of that, they lost or just had a bad game or whatever, he would notice that the coach would immediately come up, pat the guy on the back and say, don't worry, we'll get him next time. However, he said he noticed like if they did the right thing, he noticed the coach wouldn't come up and say that. And so he asked him about it. And he said, Kevin, after you've made the winning basket, you've got 15,000 people cheering for you. TV stations come at you and everybody giving you high fives. You don't need me then. When you need a real friend is when you feel that nobody likes you. And that was so powerful. I was like, I love that he brought that up, because I think we can all relate. Like when something goes bad, it's those people that come close that make you feel good and like, okay, it's going to be fine. Like we got this, we can move forward. Because you're already beating yourself up and you kind of need those people. So if you do need to confront somebody, he says, if you've already checked your motives, then you need to ask two questions. Am I ready to confront? And then number two, is the other person ready to hear? I actually had somebody tell me this the other day. I was like, whoa, two things. So the third thing is the tone in which people say something. People often respond to our attitudes and actions more than to our words. Many petty conflicts occur because people use the wrong tone or voice. or tone of voice. I noticed this the other day before I had even read this. I was at the grocery store and the cashier checking me out. I had this exact thought. She just like the tone of what she was saying. I'm like, it really affected me and like made me kind of like in a bad mood. And I was like, she's rude. And I just, in my mind, I'm like, the tone that people use, it really is more important than most people realize. And so reading that, I went back to the cashier from the other day. Number 4 is temperature. He uses this example of him and his wife. If they were going to sit down and have to have the conversation with their kids, they would hold hands with each other. So that way, if they would start to overreact or get too heated, they could like squeeze each other's hand to just kind of help each other stay in line. So he says to trade in your hammer for a velvet glove, you need to let the past stay in the past. You need to ask yourself, is my reaction part of the problem? Don't make things worse by overreacting. Remember that actions are remembered long after words are forgotten, and that the way you treat people will stay with them a lot longer than the words you choose. He says, never let the situation mean more than the relationship, kind of going back to that first scenario with his wife. Treat loved ones with unconditional love. He says we gossip because we fail to love. When we love people, we don't criticize them. If we love them, their failures hurt. We don't advertise the sins of people we love any more than we advertise our own. And I thought that was like a very powerful statement, something I definitely put a little star next to. He says, admit wrongs and ask for forgiveness. Admitting you're wrong and asking for forgiveness can cover a multitude of sins. And that to kind of wrap it up, he says, the first thing you ought to do is look at yourself and let your colleagues hold the mirror and tell you what they see. If you don't believe them, do the same with your loved ones and friends. And so that kind of wraps up the hammer principle. So moving into the elevator principle, he says we can lift people up or take people down in our relationships. People can be the wind beneath our wings or the anchor on our boat. So the question that I must ask myself, would others say that I lift them up or take them down? So he starts with this example of this teacher telling his students, hey, we're going to do this experiment. And they were told you have to give people compliments and let's see the impact it has. And so during this experiment, he also said, one of the first things that people would say is like, I feel insincere giving someone a compliment. And he kind of addressed it and said, no, it's not insincerity when you compliment your enemy. For the compliment is an honest statement of praise for some objective trait or merit that deserves commendation. Your praise may buoy up the morale of lonely souls who are almost ready to give up the struggle to do good deeds. You never know when your casual compliment may catch a boy or girl or man or woman at the critical point when he would otherwise toss in the sponge. And I think this kind of goes back to the timing of it, but your words, they really do have such power, and you can speak life into people, and just remembering that it's such a powerful thing. He says the world is starving for appreciation. It is hungry for compliments. But somebody must start the ball rolling by speaking first and saying a nice thing to his companion. As we must account for every idle word, so we must for every idle silence. And that's from Benjamin Franklin. So he has this poem here, and I wasn't sure if I was going to read it, but then I was like, I think it's a really good thing to just go over, because based off this poem, he gets 4 types of people from it. So it says, there are 2 kinds of people on earth today, just 2 kinds of people, no more I say. Not the sinner and saint, for it's well understood, not the good are half bad, or that the good are half bad and the bad half good. Not the rich and the poor, for to rate a man's wealth, he must first know the state of his conscience and health. Not the humble and proud, for in life's little span, who puts on vain airs is not counted a man. Not the happy and sad, for the swift flying years bring each man his laughter and each man his tears. No, the 2 kinds of people on earth, I mean, are the people who lift and the people who lean. Wherever you go, you will find the earth's masses are always divided in just these 2 classes. And oddly enough, you will find 2, I ween. There's only 1 lifter to 20 who lean. And which class are you? Are you easing the load of overtaxed lifters who toil down the road? Or are you a leaner who lets others share your portion of labor and worry and care? And so based off of this, I thought this was such a good poem, and I've never read this before. He gets 4 types of people. He kind of took it a step further. And so the first type of people, he says, some people add something to life. And so for these people, we enjoy them. And he says, do all the good you can to all the people you can in all the ways you can, as long as ever you can. So people who add value to others almost always do so intentionally. Friendship consists of a willing ear, an understanding heart, and a helping hand. And he talks about I think it was his nephew, I believe, Troy was his name. And he says he came to live with him. And some of the advice that he gave him starting this new job, just to build up like good rapport there, was go early and stay late, do more than is expected, do something every day to help the people around him, offer to go the extra mile for the boss. And I love those, especially when you're stepping into something, just to like build trust and, for the promotion or whatever, like you're showing you have integrity and that you care. I thought that was really good. So the second type of people is some people subtract something from life and we tolerate them. Now, something to point out is this, he mentions, is usually unintentional. It's like people that aren't really adding value to you, but it's not like they're intentionally trying to subtract. But if you're not an adder, you're probably a subtractor. So this is like unintentional. So he says, to remember, receiving is easy, giving is much more difficult. It's similar to the difference between building something and tearing it down. It takes a skilled craftsman much time and energy to build a beautiful chair. It takes no skill whatsoever to smash that chair in a matter of moments. The third type is some people multiply something in life and we value them. So from the first person, we just enjoy them. But for this person, the multiplier is that we value them. He says, people that he considers to be this in his life, that they have a servant's heart, tops in their field, they value partnership, always generating great ideas, they're passionate about making a difference, they help to sharpen my vision and maximize my strength. So that's multipliers in your life. Number 4, some people divide something in life, we avoid them. These are intentional, like the people that are not adding but are subtracting, but this person is intentionally doing that. They want to take you down to the basement, meaning they'll take you down as low as they can, as often as they can. So he mentions that he believes that deep down everyone, even the most negative person, wants to be a lifter. So lifters commit themselves to daily encouragement. Wherever there is a human being, there's an opportunity for kindness, encourage others and do it daily. Lifters know the difference that separates hurting and helping. You hold the power to make another person's life better or worse by the things you do today. Those closest to you, your spouse, children, or parents, are most affected by what you say and do. Use that power wisely. Lifters initiate the positive in a negative environment. Lifters understand life is not a dress rehearsal. And to kind of wrap up this principle, he says, I expect to pass through this world but once. Any good, therefore, that I can do, or any kindness that I can show to any fellow creature, let me do it now. Let me not defer or neglect it, for I shall not pass this way again. People who lift others don't wait until tomorrow or some other better day to help people. They act now. And okay, so I'm going to quickly go into this last one. So this moves into the connection question. Are we willing to focus on others? He says, we have to stop thinking about ourselves and we have to begin focusing on the people with whom we desire to build relationships. So again, are we willing to focus on others? So the big picture principle, it says the entire population of the world, with one minor exception, is composed of others. So the question I must ask myself, do I have a hard time putting others first? And he brings up Angelina Jolie and how she really struggled. And I don't know the timeline of like when she went on finally got outside of her little bubble. She felt like even though she was famous and doing all these movies, that she really just hadn't made an impact or like a purpose-filled life. But once she went to travel and she realized like, wow, I can do something to actually have impact. And so she started to feel like she had purpose. So it says she realized that the entire world was made up of other people, many of whom were in dire circumstances, many of whom she could help. She says, you could die tomorrow and you've done a few movies, won some awards. That doesn't mean anything. But if you built schools or raised a child or done something to make things better for other people, then it just feels better. Life is better. She stopped focusing on herself and began putting other people ahead of herself. So to kind of, because I'm out of time, to wrap it up, there's perspective. He mentions your perspective. How can you help people? You have maturity, which he mentions it doesn't mean just because you like whatever age you are, that doesn't mean that your maturity is growing. So that has to be intentionally done. You have to act on your maturity as you age. Responsibility. Leadership puts similar demands on people. Accepting leadership responsibilities for the first time exposes an individual's level of maturity and sense of responsibility. Irresponsible leaders have a me first attitude and use their position for personal benefit. Responsible leaders have an others first attitude and use their position for serving people, taking responsibility, being an example, giving others credit, and mending relationships. And then he says, get out of your own little world, check your ego at the door, understand what brings fulfillment. And I kind of skimmed over those, but basically that wraps up the big picture principle. And so I'm just going to open it up to you guys to share what was your favorite principle or what was your biggest takeaway or whatever you guys want to share. So I know it was a lot, a lot of good information.
I'm just going to say that since I've started, like when he says, listen, ask questions, listen some more, ask more questions, this has made a huge impact on my relationships because you guys, I really used to listen to just respond. Like just, I was listening and in my head, I was thinking the entire time of what I was going to say. And it like made my connections, well, I didn't connect pretty much. So guys, ask the questions and just listen, because when people, like when you ask questions with people, like it lets them know that you actually care about what they're saying. And my relationships with everyone that I previously had relationships with, and now my new relationships have just gotten like incredibly stronger. And I feel like they trust me more too.
Okay, so I think what I resonated with was tone, because I can come off pretty harsh, because after being in the job that I have for so many years, it's okay, get over it, stop your whining, take your medicine, quit griping about it. And sometimes I don't come across very polite. And so it's weird because I have started seeing other people give bad tones, and I'm like, "Ooh, snap, that sounds bad." And then I'm like, "Oh crap, that used to be me." So, it's kind of brought it to my attention a little more that you can be nicer to people and they're going to respond better if you're kind. And it's made the biggest difference in the world, because now people are more friendly and they're like, okay, I just want to talk to Annie. I don't want to talk to anybody else. I would like to talk to her. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of nice. So I have been working on my whole tone. So that is what I resonated out of that.
I loved all of those things that you shared, Kylie. I especially love this on page 40, and temperature, I think, is really important, especially when dealing with people and learning how to deal with people. If the reaction is worse than the action, the problem usually increases. And if the reaction is less than the action, the problem usually decreases. So just knowing how honest to be with people, or I mean, really just how honest, like how much to share, how much truth to share. Like, is it too much information? Was I too hard on them? You know, just, and it varies based on the person. So knowing, I tell my husband this all the time. I'm like, communication is not what you are saying, it's what the other person is hearing. So if you're communicating that you love me by buying me chocolate covered cherries and I flip and hate them, I'm not going to receive your love that you're giving. And our teams aren't going to receive, or our customers aren't going to receive what we're giving to them either, unless we're speaking their language. And the only way to know if we are or not is by getting that wisdom, by taking the temperature of the conversation. Like, how did they respond? Okay, I'm talking too harshly with people. I can't talk like that anymore. Or even when we're doing our reach outs, or, you know, signing someone up, just learning how to communicate to get the end result that we want is just based on how we communicate with that person. And you can talk differently to different people, and just knowing who you're talking to. So I just really thought that was helpful.
Yeah, and I don't know what part he said it, but he was saying how when you are super interested in the other person, somehow it comes back to you that you've made a bigger impact, you know, on them. And I think too, when you're so open and like more curious, and so instead of being like, oh, this is how I'm going to respond the whole time the person's talking, if you just kind of like out of curiosity, just be like, well, why do you think why do you think that you thought that, or what made you whatever, you know, just being more curious. I think sometimes if they do want your advice or want you to be more honest, then they're going to say, well, what do you actually think? Like, tell me. And I feel like they're more open to whatever you're going to say. It's going to be received so well because you've taken an interest and you're actually listening, and like not just trying to, oh, well, my advice is and what I think you should do. So I don't know where that was or how he exactly worded it, but he did say that.
I'm with Annie on the tone thing. Even my husband, obviously, who's probably gonna look at me funny, like, oh, she finally gets it. But that's definitely something like I've always just been kind of like blunt in a way. And it's definitely gotten way better. But I really did like those chapters of the book, or that section, because it's so true. And obviously, I was never like crazy or anything, but you know, you get on the phone with someone and they're just like have this terrible attitude with you, and you're like, what did I ever even do? Like, good grief. So just like remembering that, you know, like the way we're talking can definitely come off a certain way. I think it was How to Win Friends and Influence People. He says just smile when you talk on the phone, and you'll just sound happier. So that's something that I think Fallon or that book or someone told me to do, and I've definitely started doing. Also, never send a voice message when you're working out, because Fallon told me not to do it one time and I did it because it was to my friend and she was just like, are you mad at me? And I'm like, no, I'm working out. And Fallon was right. So now if I am working out, I'll be like, by the way, I'm working out. So in case anyone needs that little tip, don't do it.
I'm with you on the tone, Courtney. Like I have to definitely be mindful of my tone. Something that I learned that has always stuck with me is that you can be right in principle, the subject you're talking about, the point you're trying to make, your principle, like you can be right, but if you're wrong with your tone, or you can be wrong with your timing, and if you're wrong in your tone or your timing, your principle, like what the point you're trying to make is like voided out. So it's like, so you want to be really wise with your tone and timing. If your principle is really that important and really that spot on, Like you have to be wise with that. And so I know that in sales right now, like a lot of the sales like training that's available right now, I'm seeing a lot of like the top dogs talk about tonality when you're selling to people. And one of the top things that I'm learning is that like your tonality when you're talking to people needs to be more quiet and more slow because it brings a sense of peace and calm into the sale. And it also emotionally detaches it makes you seem emotionally detached from the outcome. So when you're like, oh, I would love to hear more about that. Instead of what do you mean? Like, tell me more about that. Like, it's giving two totally different vibes and can change the outcome of a whole sale just by your tonality. So I've been finding that specific topic to be so interesting lately.
I feel like we don't talk about tone a whole lot. Like we talk about attitude and positivity and stuff like that, or being passionate, but really it does come down to how you deliver a message, how it's going to be received. And so you could be the smartest or stating a fact or something, but just how you present it to somebody is going to be like depend on if they're going to receive it or rub them the wrong way. I think I just had that realization at the store. I actually had that exact thought in my mind of like, man, your tone when you're talking to people, it really does impact the other person. I don't know why it bothered me so much. She didn't even say anything bad, like negative. It was just, I'm like, wow, like this is, maybe she was having a bad day, but it like rubbed off on me and just rubbed me the wrong way.
I feel like checking our motives of, are we trying to communicate or are we just trying to talk? And recognizing that it's like human nature to want to get your point across and want to prove yourself right. And you very well might be, but again, it's like I said, communication is what's being received, not necessarily what's being sent. And I think one of the best things I've ever done is slow down. And I'd say like delaying my responses and really thinking about them, probably 75% of the time I change what I would have originally said. So just knowing like whoever you're talking to, if you really care about them, they probably deserve a little thought put into whatever you really want to say. And we often, I think, put the least thought into quick responses to people that we do truly care about. But then again, once it's out, it's out.
Anybody else? I know we're right at 8:30. There was so much. I feel like I was trying to rush to go through it. I actually was like sweating a little bit trying to hurry to go through it. Anybody else have any last thoughts?
I want to say one thing about Angelina. I'm like girl fan Angelina here. I followed her for years. And I think a cool thing about her is she changed like that, like one thing. And look at all the effect that she's had, positive effect. And so even if you find something that you're like, oh, I should probably work on that. I think that's encouraging that she could have such a dramatic turnaround so quickly. And it was just one decision that she made after she learned something.
Yeah, I really like that. I don't really know a whole lot about her life or story, but I think it goes how we're always talking about like our purpose goes beyond us and our gifts and stuff. They're not even meant for us, they're meant for others. And it was kind of like when she was so self-focused of like, it's just me. And she was depressed and suicidal or all the stuff that drugs use and all that. But it was like once she got outside of herself and realize the impact she could have and the purpose. And wow, like there's a whole world and then there's just me. So that little shift changed her whole life. I think it was really good. Okay, so next week we are going to be reading the principles 7 through 9, which are the exchange principle, learning principle, and the charisma principle. So have those 3 read next week, and we'll see you next Thursday. Bye, y'all.